Hello, how are you? Today is Erev Shabbos Kodesh, Parshas Lecha, and this is the Parsha which we begin living with Avram Avinu, which is where the Rabbeim said that this is where we start really enjoying, in a joyous way, the story of the first Jew, Avram Avinu. I forgot to mention, I hope everyone is gesund, stark, und freilich, begashmis und beruchnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. As usual, we started now with tzedakah, gedelut tzedakah, shemakareves agula, Mashiach should come now. We'll say a prayer, and then we'll get to the parsha, and we'll speak about something which I never heard anybody speak about this. It's a talk from the Rebbe. We'll soon see. It's going to be something which is practically relevant for every single day of your life. But we'll say a blessing, one of the blessings in Shemoneh Esrei, Atocheinen l'adam das, malabim d'nesh bina, chaneinu mi'itra chachma bina v'das, baruch atah Hashem, chanein hadas. You graciously bestow knowledge upon man and teach mortals understanding. Graciously bestow upon us from you wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Blessed are you, Lord, who graciously bestows knowledge. So even though we start off by saying, das, and we also say Chaneini mitcha chachma bina v'das, but in the end we finish off Chanein hadas. So for those that are Chabad Chassidim, obviously Chabad stands for Chachma bina das, and there's much discussion about the distinction between Chachma, bina, and das. So we're not getting into that right now at length, but in general, das is translated as knowledge, as we just saw. But das means when it becomes one with you, when you connect at a very deep level, that it's not only theoretical, but it becomes experience. You're feeling it also emotionally. It's the bridge between the intellect and the emotions. So from this bracha, we see itself that the main point is das. Somebody who has chachma bina, whatever the meaning of chachma bina means, but it's not as powerful and not as important and it's not as essential and consequential as das. As the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 3, someone who has chachma bina but he doesn't have das, could be that all the feelings and everything that he's thinking about could end up to be dimyonis shov, which he translates over there in English, they translate as vain fancies, which means it doesn't really come down into action. It's abstract, it's not concrete. And we'll speak about that today in connection to the Parsha Shavua. Parshas Lecha, obviously, is epic, monumental, where we begin the story of the first Jew, Avram Avinu. And it starts with Lech Lecha, Me'artzecha, Me'ladecha, Be'savicha. This is one of the tests where Avram, at 75 years old of age, Hashem tells him, move. He didn't tell him where. Imagine a person who's settled in life, he's 75 years old. One day he gets a revelation that tells him, move. Pick up all your possessions, all your past, whatever it was till now. Cut ties. And go. Anyways, and in this week's parsha is the story how Avram circumcised himself, bris milah, and it's a story about the way he fights the armies, the wars. There's so many adventures that are monumental and epic. But we're going to choose today to speak about something which I haven't seen anyone speak about it except for the Rebbe. What I'm going to tell you now is based on a small talk of the Rebbe from Parshas Lech Lecha Tav Shin Mem Ches. The Rebbe over there brings, it's a Rashi Sikha. It says right away in the beginning where Avram was told that he should leave, and then the pasuk says that he left. Vayetzel Lechas Arza Canaan, Vayaveyu Arza Canaan. He moved. He responded to Hashem's call. He passed the test, and then it says in pasuk Ches right at the beginning of the parsha, Vayatek Mishom Ha'ara Mikedem LeBeis Keil. From there he relocated to the mountain east of Beth Keil. Vayet Ohaloi Beis Keil. And it says he pitched his tent. That's the literal translation of the words Vayet Ohaloi. He pitched his tent. Rashi over here says something very interesting. On the word Ahloi, his tent, Allah ksiv, it is written here with the same spelling as Allah, which can be translated as her tent. Usually if it meant his tent, it should end with a vav. Allah, his tent, but over here it ends with a hey, which could be translated as her tent. And this implies that Betchila Noto es oil ishtai. First he pitched his wife's tent, and afterwards his own. So in general over here, it's interesting to note, we see that the husband and the wife had separate tents. And we see later, interesting, just as a side point, go to Parshas Chayisara, where Rashi mentions this again, and it's also clear from the Pasuk, where it says the story of Eliezer gets a wife for Yitzchak, Rivka, and he meets Rivka, and the whole story that happens with her, and then after where Rivka takes care of the camels, etc., the Pasuk says that this is in Kapitel Chav Dalet Pasuk Chav Tes, that wrong Pasuk. I'm trying to find I can't find the Pasuk now. It says that Rivka ran. Pasuk Chav Ches. Kapitel Chav Dalet Pasuk Chav Ches. Vatoretz Hanara Vatagid LeBeis Ima. She ran to her mother's house and told her everything that happened. So Rashi says over here, what does it mean to her mother's house? Lebeis Ima. Rashi says, very interesting, Derech Hanoshim Hoisa used to be the practice of women, Lias Lam Bayis, to have a house for themselves, Lecha Bolim Lachton, in which to sit for their work. And Veina Bas Magelis El Ima, and the daughter does not confide in anyone except her mother. Therefore, Rivka ran to her mother to tell her what happened. But over here we see from Rashi later on in Chayesara that was the way of the world at that time. There was one tent for the husband, another tent for the wife. Obviously, they shared a tent. They were living together. But there were times the wife had a separate tent to do her work, whatever her work was in that time. I don't exactly know. Cooking and baking, and I don't exactly know, washing clothes, whatever it was. Anyways, so over here, on this that Rashi says, Ahloi, that Avram Avinu pitched her tent, the wife's tent, the woman's tent before his tent. The Sifsei Chachamim, who's a commentary on Rashi, says the following. He says that, how does Rashi know that he pitched her tent before his tent? How does Rashi know this? The Sifsei Chacham, the Sifsei Chacham says, maybe opposite, maybe he pitched his tent before her tent. Because the Gemara says, the Chayav Adam l'chabed ishtoi yoyse migufay. Man is required to respect his wife more than himself. So imkein, if so, vaday shalom not to b'rishayna. So therefore, he definitely pitched her tent before his tent. So on this, the Rebbe asks a question. The question is, since Rashi wrote his commentary, as he himself said, only to explain the simple meaning of the text, for a ben chamish l'mikra, for a 5-year-old, so what is the Sifsei Chacham saying that Rashi knew this from the Gemara? Because the Gemara says that Chayav Adam l'chabed ishta yosem migufay, but the question is, how is a child going to relate to this or take this as a message? He never heard of a Gemara. He never learned a Gemara. So it's going to be very strange. He's going to see these words over here that says that Avram pitched her tent before his tent. He never learned the Gemara, so he doesn't understand what this is all about. He doesn't know about this concept whatsoever. So how could a 5-year-old relate to this? And over here the Rebbe gives a moedik, simple answer. The Gemara answers that the Rebbe answers the child knows about it not because he learned it in Gemara, but because he's brought up in a good Jewish home. And in a good Jewish home, this is obvious to him that he sees that the way his father respects his mother more than himself. more than the father himself. And he sees that all the time in his house. Over here, by Rashi writing what he writes, it just reaffirms and validates what he's seen the whole time, that the husband respects the wife more than himself. That's what the Rebbe answers. And the Rebbe says, like obviously, for example, a child, the Ben Chomish Lemikah, knows that you have to keep Shabbos before he learns Parshas Yisroi and the Aseret Hadibris. So before he learns about it, he's already experienced it because of the chinuch, because of the education of his home. He knows about the assay of keeping Shabbos. He also knows about the leis assay of not stealing. So with this principle, it's amazing how there's so much that can be learned from this. Over here, first of all, comes the idea, which is really also integrated. I don't want to mix into this now, but the Ramban, on this week's Parsha, and throughout the Sefer Chumash, the Sefer of Bereshis, he brings the principle of Ma'isa Ovoi Siman Lebanim. The story, the actions, the deeds of our patriarchs are a Siman Lebanim, are a sign for the descendants. Now, in that itself, there's many interpretations. One interpretation means that why does the Torah elaborate in all these parshas? It's a general rule about the whole Sefer Chumash Bereshis, where it talks about the story of Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov, and it gets into details about the travels and where they traveled. Because the truth is, it's all in a way a prophecy. Everything that happens to the forefathers will happen through history throughout the Jewish nation. You just have to know how to interpret it properly, but this is all foretelling what's going to happen to the Jewish people. That's one interpretation of Maisa Ovesim Lebanim. Another interpretation, the Rebbe would mention it many times, that it's an Asinas Koyach. Every one of these stories was an empowerment to future generations when there will be similar circumstances and similar situations, and the stories that had happened with our forefathers gives us the strength forever to the Jewish nation in similar circumstances to be able to overcome and triumph. But then there's also a very, very simple interpretation. Maisa Ova similar Banim, the way the Ovas acted is a sign how we should act. And we get to many concepts, the idea of chinuch, education, the idea of parents as a role model. The Rebbe would tell many parents by dollars, talking about Jewish education, the Rebbe would actually tell them the best way to impact your children is if you will be a living example of what it means to be a Torah observant Jew in day-to-day life. So that's also the point. Over here we see that the child, the Ben Chomish Lemikra, he knows how he's supposed to act because this is what he sees in his house. But I want to talk about another concept which I find so gishmak and has many interpretations, and that is the idea of Gedola Shimusha Yosem Limuda. There's a Gemara in Brachas that says that who is the ultimate disciple? The ultimate disciple is the one who not only learns from his master, but serves his master. That's what it means technically, literally. Gedola Shimusha Yosem Limuda. It's greater than one who serves the master than learns from his master. It's a Gemara in Brachas, and over there it says, Omer Rabbi Yechanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Rabbi Yechanan said, in the part of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Gedola Shimusha Shel Torah Yosem Limuda Shenemar Poi Elisha ben Shafat Asher Yotzak Mayim Al Yidei Eliyahu. So here is Elisha ben Shafat who poured water on the hands of Eliyahu, and the Gemara says, Lomad Lo Nemar. It doesn't say he learned by Eliyahu Yotzak that he poured the water. So here we see, in other words, Elisha served Eliyahu, and that's why he became the greatest disciple. It says similarly concerning Yeshua and Moshe, Lo Yomish Mitoicha Oyel. Same idea. It wasn't so much that Yeshua was the Talmud Muvak. He knew all of the master's lessons. He also saw and observed, spent time with Moshe, Lo Yomish Mitoicha Oyel, Mamish next to him in his Daled Amos, observing everything, how Moshe lived his life. So the idea of this is, and from this in Chassidus, in Chassidus, in the Friedrich Rebbe's talks, Gedola Shimusha Yosem Limuda means more the idea of Chassidische Farbrengens. Like we say the famous line, where Judaism is not a subject, but a way of life. It's people, the people that, like Messiah, the ones that observed other Chassidim, older Chassidim, heard stories of tzaddikim, and listening to stories of tzaddikim, actually, Meiser Rav, experience. As they say, experience is the best teacher, because from these stories of great Torah sages and Torah scholars and tzaddikim, we actually learn more sometimes from the technical learning. Now, obviously, yesh bezeh mashem bezeh, we need learning. But this is the chidush. The ultimate level, who becomes the prized disciple, the ultimate disciple, which means where is the mentorship complete? Not by the one who just studies from you, but the one who actually lives with you, who's the closest to you, and sees it firsthand. And that's what it means when we say experience is the best teacher. Just to give an example from life, sometimes a person can learn Hilchas Malicha, which is about soaking the meat in the water, and you can learn Hilchas Treifas, which talks about an animal and his lungs, and what's kosher and what's not kosher. So people say that, ones that are learning these halachas, that, they spend one day in the slaughterhouse actually seeing the animal and seeing the process. They learn sometimes, in a certain sense, more in a day spent in the slaughterhouse than many, many hours studying from the book. So, of course, you can't be a Rav if you didn't learn the halachas, obviously. But therefore, there's something called shimush. Every Rav who's a proper Rav, a rabbi, a halachic authority, has to receive shimush, which it's like apprentice by another rabbi, because it's that apprenticeship which really clinches the deal, which makes an impact more than anything else. You can also connect it with they say the fifth Shulchan Aruch, the fifth volume of Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch is like 4 parts. They say the 5th part is common sense. But what does it mean? It means usually you have to have experience, you have to receive from someone else, and that really is the one that teaches you the most, in a way. Anyways, so this is also a great lesson. Let's go back to what the Rebbe is saying over here. The Rebbe is saying that this child didn't learn the Gemara yet. So he doesn't know that the person has to be mechabed ishtayes megufi from a Gemara. He doesn't know it from a book. He didn't study it yet. Some things you know not from studying it, but from living it. And this is very, very important if we speak about chinuch and education. And I said this many, many times for myself. My mother, Oleh Shalom, did not learn in a school, a yeshiva for girls, even one day of her life. Today we have Beis Rivka, we have Sarah Schneer, we have all these schools, and it's very important, and education is the number one thing. But guess what? Experience is the best teacher. Experience is the best education. Which means what the child sees by the parents is just as important. So if we speak about my mother, I've said this already many times. Number one, my whole connection to Chabad Lubavitch is because my mother came from Minkach. And in her home, they were brought up, and the whole city of Minkach was about the Minkach Eruv. So when she came to America after World War II, she was a survivor of Auschwitz. So when she came and she moved to Crown Heights, they first lived in Williamsburg, she wanted to know who's the Rebbe over here. She had no connection to Chabad Lubavitch. And she was told in Crown Heights that the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, is the Rebbe, the local Rebbe. So obviously she knew you can't live life without a Rebbe. And she requested to have a Yechidus. And from then on, she used to go into Yechidus once a year. For I don't know how many years, 20 years, 25 years. And she had a close connection to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe had a close connection to her. And listened to all her struggles and her troubles, and helped her every step of the way in situations, in the physical and financial and in spiritual advice, etc., etc. So how did she know? In other words, look at the impact. The impact on all of her children forever is because she knew from her upbringing that one needs a Rebbe in your life. She didn't read it in a book that says you need a Rebbe. It's a asay lecha rav. She didn't know that it says it's a chiyuv. It's a mitzvah. that you should relachte bedracha, whatever. She knew one thing. In her house, there was a Rebbe, so you have to have a Rebbe in your life. Another example, which I find unbelievable, is whenever, if I was a kid and I was sitting on the table, she would say, Mitun is this not the tish, Sam is bayach. You're not allowed to sit at the table. It's considered an altar. And I was a child, 10 years old, and I would sit. We're talking about if I sat on the table with my, etc. And I thought of it like my mother saying, Mitun is this not for tish, Sam is bayach. What does that mean in general? Anyways, it took me a while till I was older, and I came across a medrash or Gemara, I forgot right now, where it says, Bizman shebeis hamikdash kayam, mizbeach shel adam mechaper. Bizman she'ein beis hamikdash, shulchan shel adam mechaper. In the time of the Beis Hamikdash, it was the altar that brought restitution and atonement. In the time when we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, the table of a person where he eats his food brings atonement and restitution. And Chassidus, I learned my Moram also to get into it, why when you eat at your table, at the Shabbos table, it's like when we were in the Beis Hamikdash bringing a sacrifice. The words of Torah that you say by the table, that's like the Kohanim. And when you sing Zmires, that's like the Leviim, who would sing songs. So the whole idea of a table as something sacred. My mother knew this, not because she learned Amayim Chassidus, not because she went to yeshiva one day of her life, but obviously because this is what she saw by her mother and father. She was told, she heard, as atish is amizbayach, that the table is an altar, so the table's an altar. If I would ask her why, I doubt very much she'd be able to explain it. But it doesn't make a difference. It was ingrained. That's it. So therefore there's no other way. And the same thing, my mother would daven a mincha on Shabbos. When she would daven, she didn't always have time to daven. It would take her 20 minutes to daven a mincha. And obviously the reason she behaved in such a manner, conducted herself in such a way, it's because that's what she saw by her mother. And finally, everyone knows the Rambam, which is amazing Rambam in Hilchas Deis, Perek Hey. Hilchas Deis is translated as the laws of character. And this is the message and the thought of the week for today. Sometimes we speak about grand, epic stories, adventures of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And we have to learn from that. Sometimes we have to look at the details, something which seems not so important. And we say, no, if we're dealing with what's important, in other words, a real role model, so then even something which is seemingly small means a lot. And we see this from the Rambam in Hilchos Deis, Perek Hey. Everyone knows the famous Rambam, where the Rambam says, in the first halacha, Kishem sha'chocham nikir b'chachmasay u'b'deisov, just like the wise person is recognized in his wisdom, and his opinions, and his character. V'muvdal ben mishara, he's different. When you see somebody who's a man of character, integrity, the Alter Rebbe is talking about the Rambam is talking about a chocham. We see from the Rambam what means a real wise man. He's different, he's distinguished. And he's distinguished not only in his wisdom, that he has profound insights, but he's distinguished in every way. That's what the Rambam brings out. Kach tzorech sheyeh nikeh b'maisov. He's recognizable in his actions, but macholei, the way he eats, ub'mashkeu, in the way he drinks, ub'diburav, in the way he speaks, ub'aluchai, the way he walks, ub'malbushav, and in his clothes. He says other things there too, see there. And he finishes the halacha, v'yu kol ha'elu ha'maisim noyim u'mesukonim b'yoser. All of his actions should be exceptionally beautiful, nice, befitting, and proper. So too over here. This is the lesson over here. We talk about Avraham Avinu, and we always, every sermon, every rabbi this Shabbos is going to talk about Lech Lecha, and he's going to talk about the Nisayin of Lech Lecha, and how Lech Lecha represents the beginning of Judaism, and other major stories that happened this week, the war with the armies, it was the first world war that's recorded, and many other things, the Bris Bein Absarim. There's great things that happen in this parsha, which are fundamental to Yiddishkeit. But guess what? Let's also focus, zoom in on this Rashi, that he treated his wife with more respect. And how does the Ben Chomish Lemika know about it? Because he was brought up in a house proper, and he saw the way the husband treats the wife. And this is the lesson that we have to take. We're starting a new year, Tavshin Pei Vav, and this never ends, this discussion about education and what the children have to learn from school, and what the teachers have to do, and what the school has to provide. But let us not forget the idea of the parents and the home. G'day l'shimusha yosem limuda. The g'day l'shimusha yosem limuda means, in a certain sense, more what they receive at home than what they receive from the book, from the learning, and from they learn from a sefer. The Rebbe should help that. I'm talking to myself right now. We should all be role models, dugma chayes, living examples of the way we're meant to lead our lives. And this will be the most important thing. We have to look inside ourselves how to improve. And this will have an impact on our children and all our acquaintances and our circle of influence. And the Rebbe should help that we should have shalom in our homes. And this should bring shalom, peace, to the whole world, beginning with how we treat our wives. And as it says in many places, that through Avos Yisrael in general, will bring the Gula Mitzvah Shleima, take of Miyad Mamish. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisborech, your man in Melbourne.